Welcome to Independently Speaking, the new podcast of the Independent Schools Association. Celebrating our diversity, we take pride in representing a broad spectrum of educational settings, including nursery, preparatory, senior, sixth form, and boarding schools. This vibrant network includes institutions specializing in the arts, sports, and faith-based education, along with those offering exceptional assistance for students with special educational needs or disabilities. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Independently Speaking. Now here is your host, ISA Director of Education and Inclusion, Helen Stanton-Tonner.
Hello and welcome to Independently Speaking. I'm Helen Stanton-Tonner, your host, and I'm delighted you've joined us for another episode in our series on mental health and wellbeing in independent schools. As educators, you're at the forefront of shaping young minds and futures. Today, as we delve deeper into this critical topic, we'll explore innovative approaches from integrating mental health education into the curriculum to creating safe spaces for open dialogue. Whether you're addressing these challenges or enhancing your existing support systems, this series of discussions promises valuable insights and practical strategies. Together, we can make a meaningful impact on the mental health and well-being of our students and staff. Now, joining me today to discuss the role of the head teacher in promoting positive mental health within schools are three highly experienced educational professionals. Jonathan Hetherington is the headmaster of Morehouse School in Frensham, a leading school for boys with specific learning difficulties, where he has dedicated his career to fostering academic and personal growth. We also have Claire Osborn, an experienced group education principal for the Oak Tree Group of Schools and a reporting inspector for the Independent Schools Inspectorate. And as well as them, we have Bronia Grehan, a head of St Christopher's School and Nursery in Surrey, a school that has a foundation principle of genuine partnerships with parents. It's lovely to have you all here today.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, lovely to be invited.
Now, you all three are very experienced leaders within independent schools. And as you know, juggling your multitude of vital aspects in that role every day can be a real challenge. But what do you really think the key responsibilities of a head teacher are in fostering a positive mental health environment within your schools? Claire, could I direct that question to you to begin with?
It's a really good question, yeah. It's being a head has so many different aspects to it and so many complex responsibilities, actually. But when you look at school leadership and look at schools where pupils thrive, it's because there's a culture within those schools where the school community as a whole feels safe, well looked after, where every member of that school community can be themselves, can feel that they're heard, that they have people to talk to. So with that part of the picture, I think that's where it's helpful for heads to think about well-being sitting and why it's such an important priority. So in the midst of everything that a head has to do task-wise, there is that culture that a head is growing within the school. And well-being is at the heart of that. You mentioned that one of the things I do is that I'm a reporting inspector for the Independent Schools Inspectorate. And our framework, actually, for going into schools is about spending time in schools and seeing the ways in which a school does enable its pupils to thrive. And well-being and safeguarding sits sort of underneath so much of that. So that's why it's a priority, I think, and a priority, with the heads I work with, because they want their staff to be in a good place, because when staff are in a good place, pupils are in a better place, and outcomes are the best that they can be for the pupils within the school.
I couldn't agree more. But I think so much of this culture is so vital, and so much of it is about communication, and we communicate in so many different ways, not just verbally or not just in formal text, but people read from the head's behaviour, from their manner of speaking with people, from their priorities and what people perceive as the head's priorities. And from that, judge what is the culture of the school and what is expected of me. And there are some real traps in trying to do the best by one's staff, and lots of us are very conscious of the concept of sort of leadership through service or servant leadership. But there can be a real danger that you make accidentally sort of make errors or inspire the wrong outcome. For example, if you think, oh, well, if I work really, really extra hard, that might take the burden off some other people. And that might make it easier for them. But actually that can work contrary-wise because people see the head working incredibly hard, see the head working and answering emails late at night and through the weekend and think, well, that's clearly the expectation. And we need to be so careful, I think, of the way in which we model what we want our staff to feel and wider than staff for pupils. You are very much the lead of an organisation, aren't you, as the head?
Yeah, a leader and a listener.
Yes.
And having that time and space to listen is really important, and to be able to notice what's happening within your school.
Michael Fullan phrased it well, I thought, when he said people are good at life when they feel safe and valued and you have purpose and meaning. And he very much talks about that, learning side by side with wellbeing and making sure there's that equal amount and as head teachers really kind of balancing that up, because you can, get caught up in that academics, and actually it's just not going to work. You're not going to get the outcomes you want unless that wellbeing is really thought about. How are children coming in the mornings? How are they feeling? Are they ready to learn? And similarly for staff. So I completely agree with what you've just been saying.
I think you're right there, Bronia, because it's quite a challenge, isn't it, to get that balance between academic demands, which obviously within the independent sector can be very high because parents are looking for something very specific, but also prioritising that student mental health. So how, Bronia, within sort of obviously your children are quite young, how do you balance that sort of that early academic expectations of learning to read, expectations of reaching certain milestones? How do you balance that with the mental health issues?
We put child development at the heart of what we do. So we really think about the child, where they are. Excuse me. We spend a lot of time talking to parents about transitioning into school, being ready for school. So when they join us at St. Christopher's, we spent, before they even come to us, we spent quite a lot of time with the parents in the setting, with the child in the setting, so they're ready, they know who they're coming to, they know the adults, they know the buildings and what's expected. So when even those first few days, so important, I think, that children are ready coming in, number one. And for our youngest children, we actually use the Leuven scales to start looking at involvement and wellbeing at the same time, and really observe our children. We take a long time observing our children, saying, okay, are they settled? Are they really involved? Are they just getting on with it? And talk about those as a team, and talk about all our children as a team on a regular basis to say, what are the behaviours they're seeing? What are the children telling us? And then alongside that, then looking at our curriculum and making it as irresistible as possible. So they, all of it is the children can't help themselves but get involved. And that's our approach.
Yeah, and I think that is really powerful, isn't it? Because probably each of us as educators, we would agree that our children, our students, are likely to make the best possible academic progress if they are in an environment where they feel happy and well supported, and it's not a highly pressured environment where they feel that there's some extraordinary level to which they have to meet, they have to work towards a great pressure there. So I think often helping parents to understand that the priority, if they want the best academic outcomes for their children, that actually the first priority it has to be mental health and well-being, and making sure that they are in the best possible position to be able to learn, to feel that it is a safe space, that it's okay to make mistakes, that it's okay to engage fully, rather than perhaps protecting themselves and shutting themselves off a little bit.
I think you're right there too, because you're talking a little bit about stigma there, aren't you? Because obviously sometimes parents don't want to admit that their children might be facing challenges. Claire, across the sort of schools that you work with, have you found that there's been different cultures and different approaches, or has it been very similar?
It's really interesting. I think one of the biggest issues is giving people a lexicon, a language to talk about their feelings and emotions and their well-being, because I think the term well-being is a much used term now. We recognise the word, we sort of know what it means, but within the community of a school, it's having the language that we can apply to how we think and talk and share about it. And when I say school community, I mean school leaders, every member of staff, whatever their position might be, the pupils, their families. So where I've seen it work perhaps most effectively is where there's a common language, there is a way, there's a vehicle that a school community has wherein the pupils themselves and their families can raise and talk and share and listen about mental health and well-being. So I think that almost is a really effective strategy to try and identify how do we give people the words and the means by which they can talk and share.
Claire, I think you hit on an incredibly important point. Having a shared vocabulary, I think, is really helpful. But I come from a background where I am working with students. All of the students in my school have learning difficulties, and really fundamentally what sort of hangs most of my school community together probably is weakness in developmental language. But it's not just in specialist schools like mine. Actually, 1 in 14 children in our country will have some weakness in their developmental language, so their ability to process language. We probably, in all of our schools, we will have children who may have an autism diagnosis, and they might be very high functioning. And indeed, they might be incredibly articulate as well. But perhaps their language, whilst strong at a sort of a concrete level, really struggle with the higher level concepts, the abstract language. And you get into feelings and emotions. And actually, if you find it difficult to explain that actually you feel really frustrated because something unfair happened in that lesson or at home or on the playground, and you tried to communicate but the other person didn't interpret it in the way that you had intended it, and nobody seems to be listening to you, that is all quite complicated. And if you don't have that vocabulary to be able to find words that you can attach to feelings, that emotions that you are feeling, and to be able to explain it to somebody and feel that they are listening to it and therefore that is progressing that situation, then it all shuts down again, or perhaps it becomes very emotionally charged but without effective language. So I'm with you. That direct helping children to find vocabulary that helps them to talk about how they are feeling, how somebody else might be feeling, words to really understand the concept of compromise and to be talked through that, and the fact that compromise means that's hard for both sides of it, and nobody has lost and nobody has won, but actually together as a team. But those are really complicated concepts, and we probably almost can't talk through that really explicitly enough. And indeed helping parents as well.
No, I agree. And just as you were speaking there, it's looking at the layers through a school from, our assemblies are all based on books and text, but we talk about from and emotions there as a whole school, to our classes where children are able to every day to come in and say, well, how am I feeling today? Even in our nursery with our key workers, they start with, how are you today? How are you feeling? So even from our youngest, our 3-year-olds, we're with them and trying to give them a language to understand what's happening here. To then all the way to our year 2s who were discussing, can you disagree respectfully, because it was anti-bullying week this week, and you can still be a friend and still not have the same views, and that's okay, and talking about it, to then very specifically supporting some of our children with additional needs, and giving them the ability to say it's okay to say to your teacher, I'm feeling uncomfortable, this is overwhelming for me, can I do this? And empowering them, and legitimising it, almost that movement they need, or to say, I just need a break. And that's okay, because we all learn differently.
The overwhelming thing is a really important concept. And actually, I think as head teachers, we have a greater opportunity than perhaps any of our staff or any of our students to have an overview of our school. And to think about, again, in my school, lots of our students will have sensory processing needs. But hey, I've got sensory processing needs. The worst thing in my school year is the Christmas fair, the boys' Christmas fair. It's just sensory overload with chocolate fountains and music and sticky fingers and lots of parents and noise. And I'm delighted if I can find some really cast iron excuse as to why I'm not in school that day. But we all do, don't we? And it's not just our interactions with people, but there are so many elements of our environment that can make it a more pressured or just a more difficult environment that perhaps means that we then won't respond in as patient and possibly rational a manner. But I think there is something to be done in helping people to appreciate that, to see that, to understand that, because ultimately we will be successful, our children will be successful in the future if they develop over time a very good understanding of themselves, of their strengths, of their weaknesses, of what makes things difficult for them, and therefore they can then manipulate their environment. They can, exactly as you say, they can get a sense of, actually, I'm feeling overwhelmed, so I'm going to need to find a way to regulate myself, which might be I just need a break, I need to stand outside. And then there are very socially acceptable ways of doing that. These days, I'm just going to fill up my water bottle. But if we can teach children these strategies, then increasingly they can take control of their environment and they can manage then their emotional regulation. They have some autonomy over it.
You've touched on something really important there, though, and that's that there's not one thing that works for everybody. And actually, your first question, Helen, to me was about heads. And actually, it's so much about knowing your school community and the individuals within it and having that flexible approach, those different ways, because for some children they're never going to be comfortable sitting in a room with other people talking about their feelings, but it's about finding the way which is the way that's going to work for them. And that's the responsibility and the joy of leadership, isn't it, really, is being on that journey to discovering those things and finding what you can implement that is going to be that to
work. There's multiple partial solutions, if you like, that kind of embody the whole thing that you do.
I think you've all really sort of like absolutely really clearly explained that sort of like your role as leaders, as head teachers. You've got, as you said, Jonathan, the overarching view of the school. You have the privilege of having that, and you've talked a lot about different strategies, different ways, and they all sound incredibly effective for those individual children. But how do you, as the leader, judge that effectively? How do you know it's working within your setting? Because we could put a lot of energy into a whole lot of different strategies and resources and training for staff. How do we know it's actually working for the children within our classes?
That's a really good question, and again one which is about communication, I think, within the school, that listening and really hearing what's going on and being prepared that a system is only ever as good as its efficacy. It's only any good if it's doing something that's worthwhile. So having that flexible approach that, we try things, we look at things in different ways, and then we reflect as leaders, is it doing the thing that we intended it to do? Is there something else that might be better now?
We have such a privilege, don't we, as school leaders, that we can really make something a priority and we can give space to those conversations, that communication. Absolutely. Do we ever pull together some people, either with us or encourage people within our schools, our organisations, to spend time asking exactly the questions that Helen has asked, which is, what do we do here? Does it work? How do we know if it works? Because I'm not sure as heads that we are necessarily the best people or rather the only people to have the answer to that. And we probably, all of us in our schools, we recognise we've got some exceptionally insightful staff, creative, clever staff who have a real ability to empathise and to listen and to understand how others are coping. I mean, we could absolutely look at data trends, of course, and you can look at staff sickness perhaps and try and the causes of see if there are patterns and trends and whether particular interventions seem to have any impact on that. Likewise, pupil absence or behaviour incidents or child protection referrals. One could sort of think of so many different ways one might potentially try to explore data to see whether there are any trends that may seem to indicate. But I do think that communication, that having... We probably don't need to use the word focus group, but it potentially is that sort of thing where there are people who are interested and having those open conversations. And the fact that it is talked about openly, it is clearly a priority. And especially if something that comes out of those groups, you know, that typical you asked, we did, and you can see that therefore by people feeling that they have some influence over the developments within their working environment or their educational environment, I think that in itself speaks really strongly to mental health and well-being, and it being a culture. To come back to where we started, it all feeds in and builds that culture.
I agree, and I think leading on from that, really, in terms of communication, it's the relationships that then builds. So, from the relationships from our playground supervisor, for example, who had noticed the little person wasn't quite as happy as they happened to be, because we have those weekly meetings, came and shared that with us. We shared it on with other staff, and there was other staff who already knew that child really, really well, was able to pick the nuance of that. It was very subtle, but because they knew this child and said, actually, there's a subtle change here. What can we do? And it's often our support staff who have that one-to-one relationship with the children, teachers as well in a different way, but the support staff, because they're there on the playgrounds or in the lunch hall, in those little areas, and suddenly noticing, hang on a minute, what's happened here? And then they pick it up and then they come and say something and we do something about it. But that's all down to relationships and the trust that is built within schools, really, and we also know that relationships, of course, are preventative. They prevent and support mental health in a very different way, are incredibly important, but we can't have that without communication.
And at the highest level, I think, as well, I think there's some very just practical strategies that can support this sense of culture. Does the head report in their written report to the board, to the governors or the directors? Is it a sort of a standing item within their report about mental health initiatives or things that are happening in school? Is it perhaps an agenda item, or is there a standing committee within the board of governors or the directors that is a wellbeing, or does it fit within safeguarding and welfare? In my school, we have a governors committee that is safeguarding and welfare, which is a mix of some governors and some members of the executive. But is that a regular thing, an agenda item that's coming up in their committee meetings about mental health and well-being?
Yeah, I think this is a huge topic. We're very aware that we're probably only touching on it today. But if you were to give advice, one piece of advice, as somebody who is maybe new to headship or embarking on changing the ethos of their school to be more aware of mental health and well-being within their setting, could you think of one really valuable piece of advice which you could give them? Bronia, we'll ask you first.
What resonated with me was I was listening to Mary Myatt, who said humans first, professional second. You allow people to be human, because it's the things that happened outside of school that will impact as well. And if you're a parent, allow them to be a parent, those types of things. So humans first, but also, and to lead with compassion. But if you're going to lead with compassion, you have to fill your own cup first. So who is your support?
So important.
Your personal support. And it's overwhelming. There's so many changes coming through, so many things you have to read. And so, and for me, on reflection of that, it comes to boundaries. So knowing your boundaries, not replying to emails at a certain time and going, I'm just going to read this document at D11 because put it down, step away. It's hard sometimes. But that would be my advice.
Jonathan?
So I think my advice would probably be, I agree with all of that advice. I absolutely support that. But I think what I might say is invite people to be involved by asking the question. So ask people what they feel about the school environment, where they work. Ask pupils, is this a happy place? Is it not? Do you feel anxious, or what sort of, do you find yourself thinking about things quite a lot, the same thing quite a lot? Or when you're trying to go to sleep at night, do you find that you're thinking about things at school, and does that sometimes stop you going to sleep? But just starting by asking questions that starts a conversation and suggests to people, maybe this is a priority.
Yes, I totally agree. I would say my first word would be about listening. I think as someone new in a school or new to headship, learning to listen, deeply listen, and reflect, because actually we often in life have to make decisions really quickly, and we think about tasks and we think about solutions. But actually in headship, for something as big as wellbeing, it's learning to listen. I was also going to talk about compassion, so it's really interesting the things that you both have said, because I think coming from a place of compassion and understanding is fundamentally important, because that builds trust. And actually for people to be wholly themselves and to be their best selves, they need to know that they're accepted, that their worth is known and understood, that they're valuable, that they're seen, and that they're heard. And I think as a head, you do that at every level of your school community. So learning to really listen is a really important thing.
Yes, this has been such an interesting discussion. Thank you all for sharing so much to our listeners. This episode has given lots of insight and support into this topic and really highlighted how important it is for all of us to be aware of what we can do to support our schools, our communities, our students and our staff in the area of mental health and wellbeing. To our audience, thank you once again for tuning in to this episode of the ISA podcast series. Do look back over the series. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes where we'll continue exploring crucial topics in education. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll be back soon with more insights and inspiration. Until next time.
You've been listening to Independently Speaking, the podcast of the Independent Schools Association. For more information about ISA and the schools we support, please visit isaschools.org.uk.